The federal courtroom fell completely silent as Judge Chen leaned forward, his eyes locked on Pam Bondi. The tension was palpable. What was about to happen would shock the nation and send shockwaves through Trump's inner circle. The 66-year-old federal judge was about to deliver one of the most savage judicial takedowns ever caught on live television. Bondi, who was being considered for Trump's attorney general, had walked into that San Francisco courtroom thinking she controlled the conversation. She came armed with her usual political talking points, ready to defend Trump's policies with her trademark confidence. The 59-year-old former Florida AG had bulldozed through countless political interviews and media appearances with the same approach: speak loudly, deflect criticism, and turn everything into a defense of Trump. But Judge Chen had a different plan. This wasn't Fox News or a friendly committee hearing. This was his courtroom, where the Constitution is supreme and political theater gets you nowhere. And what he said next left Bondi completely speechless, exposing the truth she desperately wanted to hide. Beneath all the political bluster, she was woefully unprepared for the legal battle she was about to face. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that's currently breaking the internet, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of these jaw-dropping political moments. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when a federal judge stops playing games. This wasn't just a legal hearing. It was a moment judicial authority met political ambition head-on, and only one would walk away with their reputation intact. The cameras were rolling, the nation was watching, and Judge Chen was about to remind everyone who holds the real power in a courtroom. Judge Chen represents everything the Trump administration fears most: an independent judiciary that refuses to bow to political pressure. At 66, this Obama-appointed federal judge has built his reputation on a simple principle: the law comes first, politics comes last. Born in Taiwan and raised in California, Chen worked his way up from a public defender to a federal judge through pure merit. His track record speaks for itself. He's a judge who blocked Trump's Muslim ban, struck down immigration policies, and consistently ruled against government overreach. Chen doesn't just interpret the law. He protects it from those who would twist it for political gain. What makes Chen particularly dangerous to Trump's allies is his surgical precision combined with decades of experience dealing with government overreach. He doesn't grandstand or make emotional speeches like the politicians he faces. Instead, he asks one question that cuts through all the political noise: where's your legal authority? And when politicians can't answer that question, Chen methodically dismantles their arguments piece by piece. Chen's reputation in legal circles is legendary. Fellow judges describe him as unflappable and laser-focused on constitutional law. His clerks say he prepares for every case like it's a Supreme Court hearing, reading every brief, studying every precedent, and anticipating every possible argument. This isn't a judge you can steamroll with political rhetoric or intimidate with powerful connections. Pam Bondi embodies the Trump political machine: all confidence, no substance. The former Florida Attorney General turned Trump loyalist has spent years perfecting the art of political theater. At 59, she's mastered the technique of deflecting tough questions with talking points and turning legal proceedings into campaign rallies. Bondi's rise through Trump's inner circle tells you everything you need to know about how loyalty trumps competence in the MAGA world. She defended Trump during his first impeachment, attacked the 2020 election results without evidence, and now stands poised to become Attorney General. Her qualifications? Unwavering devotion to Trump and a willingness to say whatever he needs her to say. But Bondi has a fatal flaw that Judge Chen was about to expose. She confuses political theater with legal argument. In the political world, you can win by being the loudest voice in a room, deflecting questions with emotional appeals, and turning every challenge into an attack on Trump that must be defended. But in Chen's courtroom, you win by having the law on your side, citing actual precedents, and building logical constitutional arguments. Bondi was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Her preparation for this hearing revealed everything wrong with the Trump approach to governance. Instead of legal research, she relied on talking points. Instead of constitutional analysis, she prepared political sound bites. Instead of case law, she brought campaign slogans. It was like bringing a butter knife to a gunfight, and Judge Chen was about to demonstrate exactly why that strategy fails in federal court. This confrontation represents more than just a judge versus a politician. It's about whether our legal system can withstand the political pressure that's been building since Trump took office. Every time a Trump ally walks into a federal courtroom expecting special treatment, they're testing the independence of our judiciary. For Chen, this moment was about defending the principle that no one, not even the future Attorney General, is above the law. For Bondi, it was about proving she could handle the legal challenges that come with being Trump's top law enforcement officer. The cameras were rolling because this hearing would determine whether Trump's immigration policies could move forward. But what nobody expected was that it would also determine whether Pam Bondi was qualified to be Attorney General. The nation was about to get its answer. The trouble started the moment Pam Bondi opened her mouth, walking into Judge Chen's courtroom with the swagger of someone who'd spent years at Trump rallies. She began her argument like she was addressing a crowd of supporters rather than a federal judge. "Your Honor," Bondi began, her voice carrying that familiar Florida politician tone. "This administration has every right to enforce immigration law as we see fit. The American people elected President Trump to secure our borders, and that's exactly what we're going to do." Judge Chen's eyebrows raised slightly. In federal court, you don't cite election results as legal authority. You cite actual laws, precedents, and constitutional principles. But Bondi was just getting started with her political theater. "Ms. Bondi," Judge Chen interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not interested in campaign talking points. I need you to cite the specific legal authority that allows the government to implement these policies." For a split second, Bondi looked confused. In the political world, passionate speeches about what the American people want usually work. But Chen's courtroom operates on different rules. Legal rules that Bondi seemed unprepared for. "Well, Your Honor," Bondi continued, clearly rattled, "the president has broad executive powers when it comes to immigration. The Constitution gives him. The Constitution gives him what specifically?" Chen cut her off. "Please cite the exact constitutional provision and any relevant case law." The courtroom fell silent. Legal observers in the gallery exchanged glances. This was not how Trump allies usually get treated in friendly political settings. Chen wasn't playing games, and Bondi was starting to realize she was in over her head. Feeling the pressure, Bondi tried to shift tactics. She pulled out her phone, a move that immediately drew disapproving looks from court staff, and began scrolling for talking points. "Your Honor, if I may," she said, her confidence cracking. "We have extensive precedent from previous administrations. The Obama administration, the Bush administration, they all use executive power to—" "Miss Bondi," Chen interrupted again, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Are you seriously trying to argue your case using your phone in my courtroom?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Experienced lawyers in the gallery couldn't believe what they were seeing. A potential attorney general was trying to argue a federal case using talking points from her phone instead of actual legal research. Bondi quickly put the phone away, her face reddening. "No, Your Honor, I was just—" "You were just what?" Chen pressed. "Please tell me you have actual legal briefs prepared for this hearing." What happened next exposed a fundamental problem with Bondi's entire approach. When Chen asked for specific legal citations, Bondi couldn't provide them. When he asked about relevant precedents, she gave political speeches. When he demanded constitutional analysis, she offered campaign slogans. "Ms. Bondi," Chen said, his voice taking on a sharper edge, "you're asking this court to approve policies that would affect thousands of people's lives. You're asking me to set aside existing legal protections, and your justification is that the president won the election." "Your Honor, with all due respect," Bondi replied, her voice now showing clear frustration. "The American people spoke clearly when they elected Donald Trump. They want secure borders, they want law and order, and they want—" "Stop." Chen's voice cut through the courtroom like a knife. The single word echoed off the walls. Every person in the gallery froze. The court reporter's fingers paused over the keys. Even the bailiff straightened up. Judge Chen had just done something that rarely happens in federal court. He completely shut down a speaker mid-sentence. You could feel the energy in the courtroom change completely. Bondi, who had walked in expecting a routine political performance, suddenly realized she was facing a judge who had run out of patience for her games. Legal experts in the gallery began furiously taking notes. They knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. A federal judge about to deliver what would become known as one of the most savage judicial shutdowns in recent memory. Chen leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Bondi's face. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely devastating. "Miss Bondi," Chen said slowly, each word measured and deliberate. "In 30 years on this bench, I have seen lawyers come before me with weak cases, with unpopular causes, with difficult legal positions to defend. But I have never, and I mean never, seen someone walk into my courtroom so fundamentally unprepared for the basic requirements of legal argument." The courtroom was dead silent. Bondi's face had gone pale. This wasn't going according to any script she prepared. You cite no law. You reference no precedent. You provide no constitutional analysis. Instead, you offer me campaign slogans and election results as if my courtroom were a political rally. Chen continued, his voice growing stronger. Every lawyer in the room knew what was coming next. Judge Chen was building to something big, and Pam Bondi was about to become the target of judicial devastation that would be talked about for years. Judge Chen paused, letting his previous words sink in completely. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Bondi stood there, clearly struggling to figure out how to respond to a federal judge who had just systematically dismantled her entire approach. "Your Honor," Bondi tried to interject. "I think there may be some misunderstanding." "No, Miss Bondi." Chen cut her off immediately. "There is no misunderstanding. The only question is whether you fundamentally do not understand how federal courts operate, or whether you simply chose to ignore those requirements because you thought your political connections would be sufficient." The words hit like hammer blows. Chen wasn't just criticizing Bondi's legal arguments. He was questioning her basic competence as a lawyer in a room full of legal professionals. This was the equivalent of academic assassination. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media and legal blogs. Judge Chen leaned forward, looked directly at Pam Bondi, and delivered a line that would end her credibility in federal court forever. Chen's voice was calm, measured, and absolutely final. "Miss Bondi, I suggest you return to whatever political campaign hired you, because you clearly have no business practicing law in a federal courtroom. This hearing is adjourned." The courtroom erupted. The devastating simplicity of Chen's dismissal hit everyone in the room simultaneously. He hadn't just ruled against Bondi's arguments. He had essentially told a potential attorney general that she was unqualified to practice law in his courtroom. The words echoed to the marble-walled chamber like a death sentence for her legal credibility. Court reporters who had covered federal proceedings for decades later said they'd never seen anything quite like it. One veteran journalist whispered to his colleague, "I've seen judges get angry. I've seen lawyers get destroyed, but I've never seen a federal judge essentially end someone's legal career with a single sentence." Bondi stood frozen for several seconds, her mouth slightly open, clearly unable to process what had just happened. Her carefully styled blonde hair seemed disheveled now, her professional composure completely shattered. In all her years of political theater, no one had ever shut her down so completely and so publicly. The silence stretched on, becoming more painful with each passing second. "Your Honor," she stammered, "I respectfully request." "Miss Bondi," Chen interrupted one final time, "my ruling stands. Please exit my courtroom." What Judge Chen had just done was the legal equivalent of dropping a nuclear bomb. In the formal, procedural world of federal court, telling a lawyer they have no business practicing law in your courtroom is about as savage as it gets. Legal experts in the gallery immediately understood the implications. Chen hadn't just ruled against the Trump administration's policies. He had personally and professionally destroyed the credibility of their chosen advocate. The court reporter continued typing furiously, knowing that every word of this exchange would be scrutinized and quoted for years to come. The bailiff moved slightly closer to the bench, sensing the tension in the room. Still reeling from the judicial devastation, Bondi made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. "Your Honor, I believe we may have gotten off on the wrong foot," she said, her voice now noticeably shaky. "Perhaps if we could reschedule this hearing, I could return with more comprehensive—" Judge Chen didn't even let her finish the sentence. "Miss Bondi, let me be absolutely clear," he said, his voice now carrying the full weight of federal judicial authority. "You will not be rescheduling anything in my courtroom. You will not be returning with more comprehensive anything. You have demonstrated today that you lack the basic legal competence required to appear before this court." Chen then did something that elevated this from a simple legal smackdown to a constitutional moment. He addressed not just Bondi, but the broader implications of what had just occurred. "This court will not be turned into a political theater," Chen declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "The law is not a campaign rally. Constitutional rights are not talking points. And federal court is not a place where political connections substitute for legal competence." The message was clear and devastating. Judge Chen was not just rejecting Bondi's arguments. He was rejecting the entire Trump approach to governance that treats legal institutions as political tools. The legal observers in the courtroom were witnessing something extraordinary. Federal judges rarely dress down lawyers this completely, especially lawyers connected to presidential administrations. But Chen had just delivered a masterclass in judicial independence. Several reporters immediately began typing on their phones, knowing they had just witnessed a moment that would dominate legal and political news for weeks. The hashtags were already forming in their minds. Hashtag Chen destroys Bondi. Hashtag judicial smackdown. Hashtag Bondi meltdown. As the full impact of Chen's words sank in, the courtroom's energy shifted dramatically. Bondi, still standing at the defendant's table, looked around as if hoping someone would come to her rescue. But in Judge Chen's courtroom, there was no higher authority to appeal to. The bailiff took a step forward, not threateningly, but clearly ready to escort Bondi out as she continued to resist the judge's directive. The message was unmistakable. When a federal judge tells you to leave, you leave. Bondi finally understood that her political theater had not just failed. It had backfired spectacularly. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, her face now completely flushed with embarrassment and anger as she walked toward the courtroom exit. Her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor, Judge Chen delivered one final observation that would become the most quoted line of the entire confrontation. "Perhaps this will serve as a reminder to future litigants that in federal court, the only authority that matters is the Constitution and the law, not Twitter followers or presidential endorsements." The door closed behind Bondi with a definitive click, leaving behind a courtroom full of legal professionals who had just witnessed judicial history being made. Within minutes of Bondi's humiliating exit from Judge Chen's courtroom, social media exploded with clips, commentary, and reactions. The phrase "no business practicing law" began trending on Twitter faster than anyone had seen for a legal story. The first viral clip came from a legal blogger who had live-streamed the entire hearing. The 30-second video of Judge Chen telling Bondi to return to whatever political campaign hired you racked up 500,000 views in the first hour alone. Hashtag Chen destroys Bondi quickly became the top trending hashtag, with legal experts, political commentators, and ordinary citizens all weighing on what they had just witnessed. The consensus was unanimous. Pam Bondi had just experienced one of the most devastating judicial shutdowns in recent memory. The legal community's reaction was swift and brutal. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe tweeted, "In 40 years of practicing law, I've never seen a federal judge deliver such a thorough and justified destruction of a lawyer's credibility. Judge Chen just reminded everyone why judicial independence matters." The American Bar Association's Twitter account posted a thread breaking down the legal significance of Chen's ruling, noting that his criticism of Bondi's lack of legal preparation would likely be cited in law schools for years to come as an example of how not to argue before a federal judge. Legal Twitter was particularly savage. One federal prosecutor wrote, "Watching Pam Bondi try to argue constitutional law with talking points was like watching someone try to perform surgery with a butter knife. Judge Chen just saved us all from that malpractice." Conservative media outlets found themselves in an impossible position. How do you defend someone who just got told by a federal judge that they're unqualified to practice law? Fox News initially tried to frame the story as activist judge attacks Trump nominee, but even their legal analysts couldn't defend Bondi's performance. Judge Andrew Napolitano appeared on air, saying, "I've known Pam Bondi for years, but what happened in that courtroom today was indefensible. You cannot argue federal law with campaign slogans." Newsmax attempted to blame liberal media bias, but the problem was that the entire confrontation had been live-streamed. There was no editing, no selective quoting, just the raw footage of Bondi being systematically destroyed by a federal judge. Behind the scenes, the Trump transition team was in full crisis mode. Bondi wasn't just any lawyer. She was Trump's choice for attorney general. Having her publicly humiliated by a federal judge raised serious questions about Trump's judgment and his team's competence. Sources inside the transition team reported that Trump was furious about the coverage, but even his closest advisors admitted privately that Bondi's performance had been disastrous. The question now was whether Trump would stick with Bondi or cut his losses. Conservative legal scholars who had initially supported Bondi's nomination began quietly distancing themselves. The Federalist Society, which had endorsed her appointment, issued a carefully worded statement about the importance of thorough legal preparation that everyone understood as a veiled criticism of Bondi's courtroom performance. The legal establishment didn't just criticize Bondi's performance. They used it as a teaching moment about judicial independence and legal competence. Constitutional law professor Erwin Chemerinsky wrote in the Los Angeles Times, "Judge Chen's response to Pam Bondi should be required viewing in every law school in America. This is what happens when political theater meets legal reality, and legal reality always wins." The Yale Law Journal's blog published a detailed analysis of the confrontation titled "When Political Loyalty Meets Constitutional Law: The Bondi-Chen Confrontation and the Future of Legal Advocacy." The piece became one of the most read legal articles of the year. Beyond the serious legal analysis, the internet's meme machine went into overdrive. The image of Bondi's shocked face when Chen told her to leave his courtroom became an instant classic, spawning thousands of variations with captions like, "When you realize campaign talking points aren't legal arguments." TikTok users created compilation videos set to dramatic music, showing Bondi's confident entrance juxtaposed with her humiliated exit. The most popular version, titled "How to Destroy Your Career in 15 Minutes," gained over 2 million views in 24 hours. Reddit's legal communities had a field day, with the top post in /r/law simply reading, "Judge Chen just ended Pam Bondi's legal career with one sentence. Discuss." The thread generated over 15,000 comments, mostly from lawyers sharing their own stories of courtroom disasters. The political implications of Bondi's humiliation extended far beyond one failed court appearance. Democratic politicians immediately seized on the moment as evidence of Trump's poor judgment in selecting nominees. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer released a statement saying, "If Pam Bondi can't handle one federal judge asking for basic legal citations, how could she handle being the nation's top law enforcement officer? This is exactly why we need thorough confirmation hearings." Even some Republican senators privately expressed concerns about Bondi's nomination. Senator Susan Collins was overheard telling her colleague that the courtroom footage raised serious questions about competence that would need to be addressed during confirmation hearings. For Judge Chen, the confrontation with Bondi became a defining moment of his judicial career. Legal historians immediately began comparing it to other famous moments of judicial independence, like Judge Sirica during Watergate or Judge Jackson during the Pentagon Papers case. The Federal Judges Association, which rarely comments on individual cases, issued a statement praising Chen for upholding the highest standards of judicial independence and legal competence. The statement was seen as a clear signal that the federal judiciary would not be intimidated by political pressure. Chen himself remained characteristically quiet about the attention, but court sources reported that he had received hundreds of supportive messages from judges across the country who appreciated his defense of judicial standards. Legal scholars began analyzing the broader implications of the Chen-Bondi confrontation for the relationship between politics and the law. The consensus was that Chen had drawn a clear line. Federal courts would not tolerate the politicization of legal proceedings. This had immediate practical effects. Other Trump allies who had planned to use similar political theater tactics in federal court quietly revised their strategies. Law firms representing Trump-related cases began emphasizing legal research over political messaging. The American Bar Association announced it would use the Pam Bondi confrontation as a case study in its continuing legal education programs, focusing on the importance of thorough legal preparation and professional competence. As the dust settled from the courtroom disaster, the question everyone was asking was whether Pam Bondi could survive as Trump's Attorney General nominee. Legal analysts noted that her confirmation hearings would now inevitably focus on her competence rather than her loyalty. Democratic senators were already preparing questions based on Chen's criticism. Senator Elizabeth Warren announced she would ask Bondi to explain how someone unqualified to argue a case in federal court can be qualified to run the Justice Department. Conservative legal groups that had initially supported Bondi's nomination began hedging their support. The Heritage Foundation, which had praised her selection, issued a new statement emphasizing the need for nominees to demonstrate both loyalty and competence. Perhaps most importantly, the Pam Bondi confrontation became a symbol of constitutional governance triumphing over political theater. Legal scholars noted that Chen's insistence on actual legal arguments over political talking points represented exactly the kind of judicial independence the founders had envisioned. This wasn't just about one judge embarrassing one lawyer. It was about the fundamental principle that in America, the law is supreme, regardless of political connections or campaign promises. As the story continued to dominate news cycles and social media feeds, one thing became crystal clear. Judge Edward Chen had delivered more than just a legal ruling. He had delivered a masterclass in judicial independence and constitutional governance. Pam Bondi had walked into that courtroom expecting political theater, and walked out having learned that in federal court, the only performance that matters is competent legal advocacy. Her humiliation became a powerful reminder that in America's constitutional system, no one, not even future attorneys general, is above the law. The phrase, "no business practicing law," would follow Bondi for the rest of her career. But more importantly, it would serve as a warning to other political figures who might confuse campaign rallies with courtrooms. Judge Chen's savage shutdown of Pam Bondi wasn't just legal drama. It was democracy in action, with an independent judiciary standing firm against political pressure and demanding the highest standards of legal competence. If you found this breakdown of Judge Chen's devastating shutdown as incredible as we did, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more moments when our legal system stands up to political theater. The comments are blowing up with reactions. Drop yours below and let us know what you think about this judicial masterclass. Who do you think will be the next political figure to learn that federal court isn't a campaign rally?